On this video, let's talk about emotional neglect and how it shows up in your relationships. I'm Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and relationship educator, and I like to talk about how to heal attachment injuries and improve our relationships. And this video is going to be about emotional neglect, assessing for it, seeing the patterns, and reflecting on what exactly does that feel like and how did this get set up in your life. Now, this video is not going to be completely comprehensive. The truth is there's a lot of things to talk about here. I want to really talk about this idea of inner world and knowing your inner world, and how this can be very much a gateway to assessing and understanding a history of emotional neglect, because for some of us, we're very confused when it comes to assessing a history of emotional neglect. When I look at the history and I look at information and I try to find examples and memories, and it comes up a little short. It's as if there's something not there. It's as if there's this absence. So that, in fact, is a big component of what we're talking about. Many of us cannot put our finger on emotional neglect or make sense of it because it's all about non-relating. It's this absence, and that we have a tolerance for absence. We have a tolerance for relationships that have very little vulnerability, very little emotional revealing of each other, very little exchange in the form of emotional responsiveness. We have increased, we have learned, we have been trained historically, doesn't have to be in your family, but many times comes from our family, that we can tolerate non-interaction. And perhaps you're familiar with this idea of like positive space, negative space. So like if you're looking at a picture, you're looking at a painting, and let's say it's a painting of it's a still life, and it's a vase with flowers. And if we outline the flowers and outline the vase, the object itself is the positive space. It's the object that you're looking at. However, if we're going to also begin to break down the composition of this painting, and we want to look at everything around what's in the positive space, and if we've outlined the flowers in the vase, it's all the space around it, and it's called negative space. Now, I think that this is really helpful for us to understand emotional neglect and understand this feeling of absence, because it's almost like our brain is shifting from what we're looking for. It's not necessarily an object. And there's this word, there's a good crossover here that in talking about relationships, there's often this term that comes up in psychotherapy and psychology about this love object that we internalize. We have this sense of a relationship of the other person. It's internalized, and we feel it inside of ourselves, or we could think of it in terms of in our mind, that our ability to retain and hold on to the relationship as an idea, and that way the other person goes and lives their life, and we go and live our life, and then we come back together. But all the time that we're not actually physically together, we still have the relationship with us. And so let's call that like the positive space. Again, this image, this picture of the vase and the flowers. But negative space, where there's an absence, there's no vase, there's no flower, we're just looking at the emptiness around the object. So for some of us, our history was so devoid relationally. Our relationships were very, very much lacking a consistent amount of vulnerability and emotional sharing and emotional responsiveness and a presence. Back to the word positive space, absence and presence. So this not having presence, someone who's showing up and we're able to exchange back and forth, we begin to think that relationship is about this absence. We might even use the phrase non-relating. And then what happens is that we have this tolerance, we have this incredible tolerance for not connecting to the love object, for being in relationship through the absence. And then as a result, we ourselves feel absent. Now, the challenge then is like we're looking in our history for like, what's the memory? What's a moment in time? What are examples? When people were something happened in order to really put our finger on saying like this, yes, this is the assessment for emotional neglect. And we can't come up with it. Now, here's a couple ideas too to link to this that I think is really helpful, is that you can have an abandonment wound without being abandoned. And I'll explain that a little further, but I mean, isn't that interesting right there? And then it's the same idea. I mean, you can have the result and the experience of being emotionally neglected when in fact you weren't neglected. That means that if we're using, again, referencing a family environment, your family could be lovely, kind, supportive, helpful, engaging, looked out for certain of your needs. But the degree to which that was done was very limited, and it was also set up in a way that it was one-sided. There was so you can have supportive, loving caregivers, parents, grandparents, whoever is your primary caretaker, and even if they are fundamentally supportive of your well-being, that doesn't mean that they actually engaged you through emotional presence, through emotional responsiveness, through emotional curiosity. So that's very, very confusing, because even if we would consult, or if we're in a position to actually engage and talk to our caregivers, talk to our parents, it could come from relationships. So you might find yourself having the same conversation with a partner, but you say like, I want more emotional connection. And then the other person is confused if they're not used to offering a certain degree of where they are transparent or vulnerable or reveal themselves. But yet their response might be like, what do you mean you want more emotional connection? I'm so supportive of you. I help out in this way. I provide for you. I'm very much care about your well-being. And nonetheless, you have experienced, and you might feel it right now in this moment, there's this longing, this aching, this chronic emptiness that just doesn't get fulfilled. And you seem to create and recreate and find partners and adult partners and have ongoing relationships that are all seem to be about this ongoing sense of loneliness and longing for more, and you experience relationships as this absence, as the negative space, that there's really nothing there, there's no object, there's nothing really to hang on to. Now, this is also why, for some of us, those of us we say with attachment injuries, attachment wounds, attachment trauma, and I say those words in that order because it's like a continuum. You can have attachment injuries and attachment wounds. Doesn't necessarily mean you have attachment trauma. Attachment trauma is more your nervous system is completely overwhelmed and unable to process the intensity of the distress that's created when your attachment needs are not met. And then the symptoms that show up, there's a range of symptoms, but they generally fall into three categories, which we call hyperarousal, intrusion, and constriction. And then there's some very, very specific details underneath all of that, which I'm not going to go into in this moment because I have made other videos about that. And also I created a course called the 4 Attachment Distress Responses, which are poking, running, hiding, and submitting. And therefore, I'm not going to go into it in this moment. But what I'm pointing out is that some of us, we get very, very confused about living with this chronic longing for more emotional connection and trying to assess, where did it come from? And many of us, this is my experience as a therapist working with clients, that when I begin to ask questions there are a number of us who are so either legitimately know that our caretakers, our caregivers, our parents were very supportive in many ways. And so that, and even very loving. And so that creates a lot of confusion and say, well, no, I wasn't. I don't know, how could I be emotionally neglected? That's not possible because they're kind, loving people. They are supportive in many ways. And then also we have a history of taking liberties with reality, entering a kind of denial that the child in that situation, you need to override the distress and the fear of a parent who's really not there. They're there, but they're not there. And what is it like to be with someone, hello, you're really not here, you're really not connecting with me, you're really not seeing me. And as a result, I'm really not seeing you because you're not offering up who you are. And this is just fundamentally frightening. It's just frightening to enter a relationship, intimacy, and attempt to exchange some vulnerability, and nothing is exchanged. There's a guardedness, there is a withholding, there's even just a shutdown. It's like nothing is being offered. So the child, or if we're an adult in our adult relationships like this, you really have to constantly override the distress and tell yourself it's really not as bad as it is. Now, it makes sense that a child, as a kid, you can't really let in the fullness of that grief and the magnitude of what it's like when others around you who care about you are not really showing up emotionally. And it's going to feel like an incredible amount of something really, really important is missing. Almost like there's no electricity, there's no life, there's this, relationships are going to feel very one-sided because there's not this exchange happening back and forth. So emotional neglect, as it shows up in our adult relationships, are going to continually make us confused about where did this come from. And it goes back to, it links to this word, inner world, your inner world. So when I'm working with clients, and many of us say like, well, I just don't know where this came from, and I don't know if I can really pin it on, my interactions with parents, because I can't find and of course you can't find, because the thing you're looking for is not an object that you can find. It exists in this absence. It's actually where it's all of the interactions, the vulnerability, the emotional exchange that did not exist. That what is wounding is the absence itself. What's wounding is we didn't have an emotional connection. What's wounding is we didn't share emotional vulnerability. What is wounding is that there was not active, engaging, emotional curiosity in our relationships. And it's all of those things that didn't happen. It's what didn't happen that wounds us. So an entry point to begin to talk about this oftentimes with clients is asking them, did your parents, did your caregivers, did your family, did those people who you wanted to be close with, or that you thought at certain times you were close with, did they ask you about your inner world? Were they curious to know who you are, to know your thoughts, to ask you like, what does something mean? What is your experience? How do you feel about it? How something that happens, to say, well, tell me more. How has that impacted you? What are you learning about yourself? Have you experienced this before? What are you noticing right now when you share this with me? How does this change who you are? How does this help you get to know yourself differently? What is going on inside of you? Now, I don't know if you can, I'm doing my best to bring up a whole bunch of different examples of questions. What is it like for you to reveal this to me? imagining a parent is saying that to the child. And you don't have to literally be a child. You can be, a grown adult. But for others, those we're in relationship with, to take an interest in your interest, to want to know what is going on for you. And and not only where you are singled out, and it's again a one-sidedness where you have to be vulnerable or you initiate the vulnerability, but they also reveal for themselves what's going on in their inner world. What are their concerns? What are their thoughts? What are their fears? What are their dreams? We enter the world of imagination. And it's in this world of imagination where we can develop a plan, a path, a vision of how we're going to continue to grow in the relationship. And it's through how we imagine what's going on inside of us and trying to make sense of the complexity. I know, we all know that our lovely mind is sometimes not very lovely and very, very confusing, very intense, very painful, sometimes crosses into what we call, mental illness, the anxiety of life, the disappointment, the chronic losses and the grief. I mean, life is just not easy. Doesn't matter who you are, what your station in life is, where you're at. It's that being conscious, being human, being in the present moment, having hopes, and then being met with loss and more loss, and trying to make sense of our grief. Life is hard. And emotional responsiveness and emotional engagement is a way to take interest in each other's challenges and say, well, what is that like for you when you didn't get that job? What's going on for you when you find out that your partner just stops calling you? Tell me what you notice about how you feel about yourself when relationships don't work out. Do you judge yourself? Do you shame yourself? Do you have some core negative beliefs? These are the type of questions where essentially we are sharing with another person. We have a mirror. We are looking in the mirror of who we are, and then we're sharing that, what I notice about myself in the mirror, what I notice about my heart in the mirror, what I notice about the challenges that I'm living with as I look and I reflect back on who I am in the mirror of my life. Let me share with you what I see. And then after a certain amount of time, I would ask the same question of you or the other person that I'm speaking to and say, well, tell me about you. What do you notice in your mirror when you reflect? The word mirror, reflect, when you reflect on your life. Essentially, it's a way of turning the lens inward, and we turn the lens onto our inner world, and we notice. And we start naming what we notice, and then the relational piece is that we share that with another person, that there's a vulnerability, a transparency, saying, I want you to know who I am based upon what I'm seeing reflected back to me. When I turn the lens and I put my observer self, there's this ability of the mind to notice itself. And there's an incredible sense of depth and compassion and comfort and closeness when we can do this with another person. Now keep in mind, and here's going to be a really hard thing to hear. This is something that many of us struggle with. And I'm sorry to say it, but many people do not like to do this. Not only do they not like to do it, they think highly negatively of it. And they say, well, why? They are very judgmental. And there's also some negative pejorative phrases such as, well, you're wallowing in your experience, you're focusing too much on what you can't control. There might be the phrase, I don't like this one, so I just don't like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. Some people say, you're wasting time sitting around navel gazing. That just makes me angry. The nature of mind is to be inquisitive. The nature of mind is to notice itself. I mean, consciousness and raising consciousness is all about expanding awareness. You can't expand awareness if you're only looking externally. And so there's all of these like negative judgments intended to make sure like, no, let's not do that. And let's put other people down. Let's judge others who do that and who value it. And if you're like me, if you value it, that means that you want friendships, you want relationships, you want connection with family and those that you love to incorporate and include this degree of exchange. And the point that I was making was that not everybody, not only do they not want to do it, they really have no idea what we're talking about. They can't do it. And when presented with the invitation, there's really no interest. Now, if you're in, let's say, a partnership, you're in a marriage, or you have a primary partner, a romantic relationship, and you have made a commitment to be with this person, and perhaps you've been together for 10, 12 years, however long it is, and you're continually inviting the other person to say, please engage me with curiosity. Please respond back with emotional curiosity. Please ask me about my inner world, and I want to ask you about your inner world. Tell me who you are. How do you tick? What's going on with you? And I want you to know that about me. And by right of doing so, we're going to incredibly get to know each other at a depth that goes way beyond what a lot of relationships are. A lot of relationships are very surface, are very dishonest through their withholding, and also just quite simple, that really lack any range of knowing each other. And it generally, if you're curious, you're sort of interested in the world. You're interested in how things are, what things mean and how things work, and well, how do you fit in that, and how do I fit in that, and how do we get along? So my point, I think I maybe belabored this one just a little too long, but the point here is not everyone is interested in doing this. For some people, again, I'm thinking in terms of this romantic partnership, marriage, whatever it is, commitment. There are, maybe you're someone like this too, you're watching this video, and yet you yourself, for some people, they define romantic partnership as being really compartmentalized and really only revealing a limited part of oneself, and staying guarded and holding back, and do not see the value, do not see the richness, do not see the benefits of revealing who we are. And it all comes back to this phrase, inner world. And some of us, you might be watching this video, and this might be you in this moment, and you go, you know what? I don't know if I even have an inner world. I mean, this is true. It is oftentimes extreme opposites. And what I mean by this is sometimes, those of us who are emotionally neglected, we have developed a rather rich imagination, and our inner world almost was a place of escape and a place of fantasy, and it was a place of company and friendship that we could create through this inner world, an incredibly imagined life, bigger than life itself. And it was our ability to go inward and explore that inner world that actually helped us survive, that helped us develop and mature from childhood into adulthood. And some of us still, as adults, then we retain this incredibly rich inner world that allows us to, at times, be entertained, at times to problem solve, at times to comfort ourselves. Now, the opposite might be true also, is that sometimes those of us who have a history of some form of emotional neglect, it then means that this inner world is underdeveloped. We don't even really quite know how to get there. We don't have this ability to, we have no mirror. We say, well, look in the mirror, see what's reflected back to you, go inward. What do you feel? What do you see? What do you know? What does it mean? How are these items connected? How are these experiences connected? How are these feelings connected? And the moment we hear all those questions, we're just completely overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I feel. I'm numb. I'm numb. I don't. What do you mean, inner world? Like, what exactly are you talking about? And some of us are even embarrassed to bring this up because we think we're supposed to feel something more and we don't feel it, so we keep it to ourselves. And if you're in a partnership, a romantic partner, a significant other who puts you on the spot and just says, well, what's going on for you? And what you really want to say is, I have no awareness. I am so shut down to myself, I cannot identify who I am in this place and what I feel. Now, this point I'm going to make next, or what I find this incredibly interesting, is that we ourselves have internalized that sense of absence, so we can't even recognize ourselves in that place. Because relationships, when there's emotional availability and openness and responsiveness, and there's this presence and there's an exchange, we know who we are based upon how others mirror back to us who we are. That if you're sad and I immediately respond with, I see your sadness, and I myself might appropriately match your sadness with a certain amount of compassion or concern, or I myself will look sad and say, oh my gosh, what is going on? Please tell me. And then this is very affirming to your sense of self, to be able to know that I am mirroring back the sadness that you've shared, that you're feeling, and you can see that I feel it and I can see that you feel it. And then there's this exchange that happens, and the technical phrase for this exchange is called the intersubjective field. There's you, there's me, and then there's the we experience, the synergy. Think of dancing. There's choreography. There's if there's two people dancing, there's one set of legs. There's two set of legs. There's the choreography. There's the music, and they start moving. But something happens where they become one. And you can't quite tell where one person ends and the other person begins, and there's an immediacy in the present moment, and they both are playing off of each other, but it's almost like they can anticipate each other's moves. Well, that place, that understanding, that awareness is incredibly satisfying. Not always. Some people find this scary and off-putting and too vulnerable, but for many of us, it's this feeling of like, wow, we're really in it together. We're having this shared experience that is so beyond our own personal limitation. And that the benefit, the beauty of attachment, the beauty of relationship is to be able to be so moved and changed that we somewhat lose a sense of like, well, where are our ego boundaries, and that we are simultaneously being changed by the dance. We are being changed by each other. We are being changed by the present moment emotional responsiveness that's a give and take, that's happening back and forth and has a life of its own, and it's going to feel alive. And that's why we like relationships. It makes us feel alive. Now, if we don't have this mirroring, we're not going to be able to see ourselves in that exchange, because in fact it's based on a limitation. The exchange is very limited, or we might even go as far as say there's no exchange happening. And so we can't see ourselves. Our sense of self is not being mirrored back. And what the heck does that feel like when you're in relationship, but your sense of self is not mirrored back? It's incredibly painful. It's incredibly confusing. And it also means you're not getting the positive reinforcement. You're not being encouraged to know who you are. And so it's very possible those of us who have some history of emotional neglect, there's certain aspects or areas of how we know ourselves is that we don't know ourselves. Just quite simply because others around us did not show any curiosity to have us pay attention. It's like if the other people are curious about our experience, it wakes us up and lets us know, oh, I guess I need to be curious about the things that the other people are curious about me. And I guess I didn't really notice that. That's why when someone asks you a question that just comes out of left field, but it's a really meaty, delicious question, it's rich, and it's that kind of moment that it almost feels like you've been waiting for this question for 10 years, or it's a very, I'm getting the word like, is the word magnanimous? I guess in this moment, I don't know if that word applies, but it's just this feeling of, wow, you're waking up a part of me by right of your being curious about who I am, and when I wake up and when I'm put on the spot to reveal something about myself, I get to have the experience of myself. That's how relationships help us know who we are. And some of us cannot identify an inner world or identify a sense of self, identify what we feel, really know who we are, because we've really have not had that much of this kind of emotional mirroring. And that what was mirrored back to us was the absence, the negative space. And we're trying to find, well, where's the object? Not only the love object of the other person that we internalize as the relationship, but even out to know ourselves as some kind of, almost we say, like a kind of solid sense of self. Having a kind of ego boundaries, which means I know where I end, I know where you begin, and it's within the context of this ego boundary that I know the kind of person I am, and I enjoy exploring who I am, and I can feel my feelings, and I can pay attention to a process of how I'm constantly changing throughout the day or throughout the week, and I'm able to monitor what's going on inside. And some of us don't really know how to do that because of being emotionally neglected. And that is the question, coming back a bit full circle. That's the question I ask clients often who are a bit confused about whether they were or were not emotionally neglected. And I say, well, did those you're in relationship with, or even those now today, do they really ask you about what's going on inside of you? Do they want to know about your inner world? And usually, I mean, this is not always the case, but usually many of us instantly have the answer, instantly go, oh, no, people did not, be it historically in our family or even today, my partner today, my significant other today, my spouse today, is not asking me about who I am. And when that happens, it creates a range of core beliefs. I'm not lovable, I don't matter, I'm not good enough. It can bring shame. It could make us very fearful of vulnerability and intimacy. Vulnerability and intimacy themselves become the triggers that activate the attachment trauma and activate attachment distress. Trauma symptoms being the hyperarousal, the anxiety, the intrusive thoughts, the preoccupied nature, the constantly needing reassurance. Are you there for me? Are you there for me? Are you there for me? And then constriction, meaning our body constricts, we shut down, we dissociate, we're numb, we're just not here. It's too painful to be here when other people are not asking us or want to know who we are. We learned also to shut down. You can't live in this place forever where there's non-engagement. I often use the imagery of a restaurant that's closed, and nonetheless we go to this restaurant, we sit at a table and we're waiting for a waiter to take our order, we're waiting for a kitchen staff to make our dinner and our entree, we're waiting to be nourished by this meal, to be emotionally nourished, and we're at this restaurant that's closed, and this restaurant represents a relationship that's really dead, that has no life, that has no emotional exchange, where there's no interest in each other's inner world. And yet we have a history out of necessity, or you didn't know any better, or you don't have other options. That's relationship. That's just what you do. And you sit at this table day in and day out, and you do not receive emotional nourishment. And there's something very confusing about being at a restaurant that has no food, and that you're constantly, nonetheless, still trying to imagine there's going to be an entree of food, of emotional connection, of emotional exchange, of presence being offered, and it's not. And so a lot of us feel this chronic emptiness, this hunger, which translates into a loneliness, which translates into a longing, which translates into also distorting reality and pretending I'm good with no food. I'm good with a plate of nothing. I'm good with, I will continue to subsist on this one-sided, non-emotional exchange, because that's just what I do. And I'm totally, and some of us take pride in this, that we have this kind of misplaced loyalty, and that we pride ourselves in being so incredibly committed to a relationship that actually gives us back very little. Wow, isn't this painful stuff? So painful. So this video is really beginning to talk about what is emotional neglect, where does it come from, how do you assess it, and what's your relationship to your inner world, and what's it like to have people around you either ask you about your inner world or not ask you about your inner world. And another really important question is, do you ask other people about your inner world? Because of this whole thing getting set up, we can have a tendency to be incredibly self-absorbed, and we lack the skill to ask other people about their inner world, because we never really had others taking time to ask us. So when we finally do get in a situation where someone's remotely curious or somewhat offering, we might find that we really put a lot of focus on our inner world and do not balance out and put a lot of focus on the other person's inner world, because we're really like making up for a lot of lost time. Or we pick someone else who's really not interested in the inner world, but they will tolerate us sharing our inner world, and it's still this great imbalance. And so essentially we're talking at the person, we're running the relationship, we're the ones who's incredibly emotional, but it has this quality of either performance, or it has this quality of almost like we're talking to ourselves and we're hoping the other person is paying attention, but we're really simulating an emotional exchange when in fact an emotional exchange isn't happening. I mean, do you hear how complex and layered this is? So much going on, so much hurt, empathy to you, compassion to all of us, and we just keep playing out these same patterns over and over again, which is why I'm making this video about emotional neglect, why there's more videos to come. I pick a title and I think in terms of a series, so this will be the emotional neglect series, and I don't number them, but nonetheless, I'm just saying there's more to come. Now, if this video offers you value, if you can sense my passion, my investment, my interest in talking about this, then please also give back to me, create an exchange. And how you can do that is what I say, all the things. Click like, subscribe to this channel, take this link, take this video and share it somewhere else on some other social media platform, send it to a friend, email it to someone. The more that we talk about this, we break the cycle. The more that we talk about this, we realize we're not alone. So much of emotional neglect and attachment injuries, attachment wounds, and attachment trauma is all about we're constantly trying to manage it internally by ourselves. And the truth is, we heal relationally. We heal by we change. Heal here meaning mature and grow and change by being open and transparent, and that we need each other. We very much are in this together, which is why I have said for years, your healing is my healing and my healing is your healing. the more you invest, mature, and grow, the more I invest, mature, and grow. We're all together helping each other. And this is how we're changing the world, one relationship at a time. I know it sounds lofty. This sounds like, woo, wow, that's a big thing. But yeah, that's why I do this work. And if you also value learning more about emotional curiosity, emotional responsiveness, emotional exchange, and attachment, distress, and strengthening attachment bonds, then please continue to pay attention, to look for new videos on the way, a continuation of the themes shared here. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.